Well, Lucy Sullivan, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
To talk about your latest book, Barking, in which you bring up a very delicate and very personal subject. How did you choose to write about that?
I don't know that I had a choice in many ways. I started, gosh, it's taken a really long time to come to fruition. I probably started it about 10 years ago.
Oh.
And yeah, it's a long time. And I was teaching an evening live class. I was animating backgrounds at a TV studio, not very satisfied by that, enjoying the teaching, but wanting to change what I was doing. And one of my students in the evening class was a famous graphic novelist, who did a book called Leica, which won an Eisner Award way back when. But you know, I'd always loved comics and graphic novels, and said to Nick, well, maybe I should give it a go, you know, and he said, just do it, you know. And I was going through a bout of depression at the time, and my partner had said, well, why don't you try and draw yourself out of the depression by talking about it through your book, you know. So I think in many ways I had to, you know.
It's quite a hard and disturbing for the reader. I mean,
Yeah.
it's unsettling and sometimes even frightening, I would say. Was that your goal, to shake the reader a little bit for?
Yeah, I think particularly, you know, I mean, it's not that I want to upset people,
No.
but it's such a terrifying experience. And I think it is more akin to a horror story. You know, I think a lot of horror films are actually about mental health, and a lot of those stories possess that kind of quality. And I think a lot of the discussion, even when I started writing it, so 10 years ago, you know, the discussion around mental health was much, much less than it is now. There's been huge leaps in that, which is wonderful. But at the time, people spoke about depression as if, oh, you just feel a bit sad and want to stay in bed. And it was like, that's not what I was going through, you know, and I was really self-destructive. I didn't harm myself, but I instead would put myself in harm's way on purpose as some sort of punishment. And it was terrifying. And I really wanted to get across that feeling of how frightening it is, and how much you can't, I think in a book it's very hard to describe what's going on in someone's mind whilst they're going through something like that, whereas a graphic novel gives you that ability to really show someone what it might feel like as well. So yeah, I did intend for it to be scary, I'm afraid.
Well,
for the reasons.
Yes, because it is a taboo subject, and it's very not very well known, many preconceived ideas. And as you mentioned, people are inclined to say, well, everything's going to be fine, you're going to be better, it's going to go away. Where in fact, what you need is, I hear you.
Yes, exactly. And just to be able to express what you're going through. I found it, you know, really difficult to talk to people about it at the time, and I didn't really know anyone that was going through it. And mine was grief triggered, so people just thought, oh, she's just grieving, you know. But it was more than that. It was sort of grief and a mental health crisis, so which are often hard to differentiate. You know, there's a lot of similarities.
Absolutely. And you just spoke about your drawings. You have a very special technique, and it's quite unique. It's very striking, I'd say. The pencil strokes are kind of reminiscent of the blade of a knife. Was
That's
that
really
intended to be?
No, but some of it is drawn with almost a blade of a knife. So I have so it's drawn with a biro, and so, you know, just a biro pen and carbon typewriter paper. So that's kind of what gives it a real unique look. So that's like a really old-fashioned kind of black sheets of carbon that you'd put in the typewriter to get a copy of your work. And yeah, I found that technique whilst teaching and really liked it, and it gives you a kind of monoprint feel. But I use a dip pen to do it, a brass one, that is effectively like a blade. So that would be why. And I even use my thumbnails and, you know, anything to kind of really, especially for the dog, you know, the dog is sort of built out of smears and smudges and me literally tearing at the carbon to get that kind of effect. So it's a very visceral way to make a book, and it really felt like it worked for the story.
Can you tell us more about that famous dog?
Yeah, so there's sort of long been a link, particularly in this country. People talk about the kind of black dog. It was I think it was linked to Churchill originally. Winston Churchill was supposed to have described his depression as the black dog in the room, but actually I believe it's not Churchill. I think it goes back to I've forgotten his name. It's Samuel. It's the inventor of the dictionary who apparently first said it. I'm afraid I can't remember his name, but that kind of link with this kind of looming animal really kind of fascinated me, because my depression always felt like this sort of exterior to myself. You know, it was like something that kind of came over me. I used to talk about it as like a black cloud, and I would feel it just sort of would engulf me. And yeah, I started reading about it, and then my partner is from Yorkshire in the north of England, and they have this myth about Black Shuck, which is a sort of wild beast, black dog that roams the countryside. It's in the Hounds of Baskerville, or the Sherlock Holmes story. Absolutely. And that kind of sort of resonated, and I thought, I could feel this like phantasmagorical kind of beast. And then my dad was born in Ireland, and I'm really fascinated by Celtic mythology. And they have one called a puka, which is like a malevolent, tricksy animal spirit that sort of comes along to get you into harm's way, essentially. And it all started sort of coalescing into this embodiment of where I thought, well, I could describe that feeling of being kind of literally hounded by your own thoughts through this dog. And so appears to my lead character Alex right at the beginning, where he's hunting her, and throughout the book he's connected to her through the shadow, but he then also morphs into a black cloud, and so you can't ever really get to grips with him. I wanted him to feel like, you know, it's not an actual dog, it's this sort of manifestation, as it were, of her grief and her depression.
Absolutely. And what would be your advice to anybody who's caught up with mental illness or people around?
Yeah, everyone's circumstances are so individual, so it's really hard. But I think, honestly, talking is the most important thing. You know, if you're going through the grips of it, you've got to talk to people. If it's too hard to talk to your nearest and dearest, which I found it was, like, I couldn't talk to my mum about it. She's an incredibly positive New Zealander, and they just couldn't get her head around it, you know, and it's not her fault. She's just never felt that way. And at the time, my sister hadn't either. And, you know, I felt really like I'd hit a wall of who I could talk to. And it wasn't until I got into trouble that I ended up going to seek help. But I would suggest doing that sooner rather than later. If you feel like you don't have someone to talk to, then it is worth finding ways to talk to someone, whether that, you know, if you can't afford it, then there might be something you can do through a health service, or even just one of the kind of, I don't know for Canada, obviously, but in the UK, there are phone lines and helplines that you can call. And, you know, I think it's really important. Just the first thing is to say, I'm in trouble, I need to talk to someone. You know, and I think there's a lot of really good advice online as well. If you're worried about someone in your life, there's charities in the UK, Mind, Child Mind as well, that you can Google. And, you know, I would just Google how to help, and there's so much information now, it's much easier. You know, I went through my crisis at the start of the noughties, so 2000, 2001. And even then it was so hard to access stuff. I had no idea what I was going through until I finally ended up seeing a psychotherapist, and they said, oh, you're depressed, you know. So yeah, talk, and don't push people if you're worried about them. Try and get them to open up. You've got to listen and not talk at them. You know, it's hard. It's a difficult thing.
Well, it's been very interesting and most enlightening Lucy Sullivan, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. And I'm sort of beholden to Miami to mention that we have a panel coming up on graphic medicine with a number of really exciting authors, which is about not just mental health, but immigrancy, abuse, all manner of topics. It's going to be really fascinating. So please look out for our panel as well.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josie. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.